Warning. Spoilers for Bloodborne and Final Fantasy VII ahead. Welcome to another episode of Fear the Old Lore, where we look at the English and Japanese text of video games for more insight into their lore. Bloodborne and Final Fantasy VII are giants in their respective genres, and while it may not seem like it at first, there are quite a number of similarities between them. I've mentioned in previous videos that the blood in Bloodborne contains the dying wishes and wills of the dead, and blood echoes are analogous to souls, which probably won't come as a surprise to fans of Demon Souls or Dark Souls. The way blood harbors spirits is reminiscent of the lifestream of Final Fantasy VII, and both have the power to grant people superhuman strength or transform them into grotesque monsters. This is because the power of the dead is something that can be considered both holy and profane. Holy because souls have a divine kind of spiritual power, and profane because consuming them is akin to cannibalism, a taboo considered impure worldwide. In Final Fantasy VII, the souls of the deceased return to the planet and become part of the lifestream, which recycles the souls back into all living things. If it were to be stopped, then life itself would come to a gradual end. With the Shinra Corporation siphoning the lifestream away in order to produce fuel and electricity for the common man, groups like Avalanche formed to stop Shinra from bleeding the planet dry of life. While the public-facing side of Shinra uses the lifestream to produce Mako energy, its Science and Research Division also uses it in the production of soldiers that serve as the company's special forces. By bathing applicants in Mako energy, they can gain superhuman strength, but not all survive. Some get Mako poisoning, lose their minds and become catatonic, and others can even transform into monsters, similar to how Yarnamites can go mad or transform into beasts after being exposed to the old blood. The reason for this is the lifestream contains the knowledge and memories of all mankind, and coming into direct contact with it can flood the mind with arcane wisdom and sweep it away. Only those with indomitable psyches have the willpower to retain their identity in the collective unconsciousness of the planet. This is reminiscent of the insight mechanic of Bloodborne, where coming into contact with the supernatural can grant eldritch wisdom or drive someone insane. Their roles are different, but the Black Cape Men in Final Fantasy VII are like the forgotten madmen of Bloodborne. The more exposure one has to the arcane, the more it twists them into something inhuman. After generations of imbibing blood, the Temerians lost their humanity, and even their bodies began to resemble those of the spirits they'd been imbibing. However, one unforeseen consequence of transcending their humanity is that the Temerians lost the ability to reproduce. In his Drain of Blood interview with Future Press, game director Hidetaka Miyazaki has said the idea came pretty readily to him, that the more advanced a society organism becomes, the more its birth rate declines. I think it's pretty telling that the Great Ones have so-called umbilical cords when they're present only in mammals with placentas, and it might imply that all Great Ones were either human or were born from one. Since Great Ones and Temerians can't reproduce, they would need humans to bear their children, but this brings its own host of issues. If a woman were to become impregnated by a Great One, her immune system would likely recognize that the fetus doesn't have the same kind of cells as her and begin attacking it. Normally, the placenta shields the child from the mother's immune system, but in a foreign body rejection, calcium builds up around the fetus, forming into a lithopedion, or a stone baby. This is what most likely happened to the Yharnam Stone, and it seems incredibly likely that if Cainhurst were to produce a child of blood, it would turn out the same way. Since children of blood can't be born, each Great One is said to lose its child, though their consciousness may be able to persist within sleep or dreams. Naturally, if a society fails to reproduce, it will eventually die out, but if their children exist beyond the mortal plane, couldn't such a society be considered a success? This surprisingly has a lot of tie-ins to the plot of Final Fantasy VII. Much like with the Child of Blood, the Shinra company mistook the body of Jenova for that of an ancient, and injected her cells along with the lifestream directly into a developing fetus producing Sephiroth. As the child of the Calamity of the Skies and the lifestream, the strength of Sephiroth's body and will is far beyond that of a normal human's, and even when his physical body is destroyed, his horrific consciousness is able to persist within the lifestream. In many ways, Sephiroth can be compared to a Great One, and the lifestream can be compared to the cosmarically nightmarish ocean of Bloodborne. Both act as a kind of liminal space between life and death and are shaped by their inhabitants. The Hunter's Dream and Nightmare are modeled after those who have been dragged into them, which is why there are two grand cathedrals and overlapping sections of Cathedral Ward in central Yharnam, and why the Hunter's Dream comes from Gehrman's memories of the abandoned workshop. Likewise, the lifestream can be shaped by the knowledge and memories of those within it. Cloud's memories in the livestream reconstruct Nibelheim to help repair his shattered psyche, and Sephiroth can even use it to show the people the past and what's in their hearts. Normally, a person's spirit will return to the afterlife of the dream, nightmare, or livestream after they die, but certain things like grudges can keep spirits bound to the world and unable to pass on. In Bloodborne, this principle is on display in items like the Executioner's Gloves, Logarius Wheel, and Accursed Brew. Because of the gruesome deaths of their victims, these items have become steeped in the ire of vengeful specters, and we can see their ghastly reflections of the skulls which come out of them. In Final Fantasy VII, Bugenhagen mentions the spirits of the Gi tribe that were killed in battle couldn't return to the livestream, and their ghosts stagnate the air in the Cave of the Gi. The idea is expanded upon more in Final Fantasy X, where summoners perform sending rituals to guide the spirits of the dead to the far plane, to settle their negative emotions so they may find peace and not turn into fiends. Unlike Final Fantasy, Bloodborne doesn't have similar kinds of purification rituals to bring peace to the dead, though arguments can be made that the hunter may act as a kind of Grim Reaper returning lost souls to the hunter's dream, depending on how seriously we should take the Crowfeather set. It's possible the doll acts as a kind of scapegoat that accepts the sins of hunters and purifies them. Historically, dolls and human effigies have been used as substitutes to avoid curses and bad luck for hundreds of years, and in other FromSoft games like Sekiro, effigies in the form of spirit emblems harbor the remorse and souls of the dead. In Dark Souls 2, human effigies can be used to reverse the effects of the undead curse, and in Demon Souls, even though Maiden Astraya is pure-hearted, she is called the most impure demon of all for having accepted the suffering and souls of others. Even so, her true nature is considered close to that of God. Maiden Astraya's nature is mirrored in the different tiers of Coldblood. As it becomes more and more concentrated with the wills of the dead, it begins to take on more cosmarically nightmarish properties and eventually becomes Great One Coldblood. Echo Fiends, who absorb vast amounts of blood echoes like hunters, produce blood dregs, also known as Chino Kegare, or blood impurities. These blood impurities produce insight, and enough are consumed, they can allegedly allow a woman to bear a child of blood. This shows all blood contains eldritch wisdom, though it takes a high volume to produce enough impurities to come into contact with it. Because the blood grants eldritch wisdom, if a woman were to have an infant Great One, a child of blood, its mind would be developing from the wisdom within the blood and elevate it beyond humanity. Thus, even if such an infant were to die before it could be born, its horrific consciousness might be able to persist in sleep or dreams. Part of the reason these babies could exist on a higher plane is because the more blood one consumes, the more it bolsters their willpower. With willpower being directly tied to the HP stat and the ability to survive, it shows the will to stay alive can allow one to retain their identity and consciousness after they die. The stronger one's will is, the closer to greatness they become. Since Coldblood contains the wills of the dead in its blood echoes, those who absorb the most blood gain the greatest will to stay alive, which is how blood vials can heal the player. You're borrowing the wills of the dead to live again, to boost your own will to stay alive. This can even be somewhat applied to bloodstone shards, chunks, and gems. The more concentrated the blood becomes, the more power it gains, which can be used to imbue the hunter's weapons with supernatural properties. In other words, they're like materia. Materia is formed from condensing Mako energy and contains the knowledge and wisdom of the ancients. By communing with it, one can draw upon the power of the planet to produce magic. With enough of this ancient knowledge, one could become akin to a god. Although Sephiroth wasn't an ancient and couldn't commune with the planet directly, when his body was submerged in the lifestream, the knowledge of the ancients flooded into him. As the product of fusing Jenova cells in the lifestream into an infant, his mind was able to withstand the weight of its knowledge, and his incredible willpower allowed him to gain control of the lifestream and the body and mind of Jenova. Sephiroth's contact with the lifestream also gave him knowledge of the black materia and revealed the true nature of Jenova to him. By using the black materia to summon Meteor, he knew the planet would try to heal its wound using a staggering amount of the lifestream, and if he could intercept it, all the souls of the planet would merge into one being and he could be reborn as a god. It's a surprisingly common trope in Japanese media, and has a few parallels to the way the Old One of Demon Souls ceaselessly devours souls in Boletaria, or how the Moon Presence drains the echoes from hunters via Gairin at the end of each night of the hunt. Since death is inevitable, many villains seek to subvert it or end suffering by forcibly destroying the barriers between life and death. Some would usurp power in an attempt to become a god, and others would use it to enforce peace by stripping others of their will. Yet stripping others of their free will and individuality is antithetical to what it means to be human, So these villains often end up undergoing grotesque transformations to match their inner corruption as a byproduct of their actions. Sometimes these villains are men, like in the case of Sephiroth, and other times nature is the villain, as with the moon presence. Tampering with forces beyond our control and having to deal with the consequences of those actions is a recurring trope in fantasy and science fiction, and one of the questions at the core of Final Fantasy VII and Bloodborne is if it's worthwhile to transcend humanity if it means leaving our humanity behind. For Sephiroth, the Mikolash, and the Healing Church, the answer is yes, and they would sacrifice the lives of countless others to achieve their goals. After all, what's the value of an ant's life compared to a human's? What of a human's life to a god's? To them, the ends justify the means, but are they right for thinking so? Final Fantasy VII's answer is that they're wrong. The value in our humanity comes from the bonds and memories we create with one another, things we value more highly than ourselves. But these bonds and memories mean nothing to Sephiroth, and the cries of the planet wash over him like rain rolling off his back. Cloud's conflict with Sephiroth shows that even if there are times we feel weak or insecure, we have to face our challenges, and traversing the crossroads of destiny means there must always be those who fight for their freedom, even if it means changing themselves in the process. Bloodborne's answer is more ambiguous with its multiple endings, but generally, only those with the will to make their dreams a reality can decide. With the gods of its universe being unknowable beings who may have no interest in humanity, we cannot rely on outside intervention to end the night, so we must take matters into our own hands. The hunt will continue if the moon presence isn't stopped, so we must challenge it, even if it means we'll change ourselves in the process. Is becoming an infant great one a good ending or a bad ending? It's tough to say. Since Bloodborne is cosmic horror inspired, it's possible to interpret it as a tragic ending, that the hunt is destined to continue no matter what we do. However, with its trophy description saying we've lifted humanity into its next childhood, it could mean that the hunter's transformation will become a guiding force for mankind. Then again, perhaps it means only the souls of those we've inherited blood echoes from are lifted with us. So the question remains, are we a force of good or evil? It's up to the player to decide. Even though Bloodborne and Final Fantasy VII have different universes, I hope that by examining the parallels between the games we can come to a better understanding and appreciation for each of them. There are definitely other parallels that can be made between the games, like how the eyes of those who absorb Mako energy and blood echoes can glow a different color, but I hope what I've offered for now can help enrich the discourse surrounding both of them. If you enjoyed this video and these kinds of comparisons, please consider liking, subscribing, and letting me know in the comment section. Your support makes it easier to continue working on these kinds of projects, and I look forward to producing more. Thank you for watching, and thank you to all my patrons, channel members, commenters, and subscribers. I appreciate it. And if you like talking about lore, FromSoft, and games in general, feel free to join the Discord server. The link is in the video description. Fear the old lore.